Last Sunday we heard from the prophet Amos, who talks about 760 BCE. And Isaiah, we're hearing today, he comes about 25 years after Amos. About 15 years after Isaiah proclaims this message, Assyria will conquer Israel. So Amos spoke to Israel, the northern kingdom, which will be conquered soon by Assyria. And Isaiah speaks to Judah, the southern kingdom, which includes Jerusalem and all the kings in the line of King David. And this time was a really difficult time in Israel and Judah. Assyria, the great empire to the east in modern-day Iraq, had not been a strong empire, but now it's on the rise. And like Ken Burns' American Revolution this week, there's a tension in the region of Israel and Judah about whether people should declare their independence from Assyria and rebel against Assyria, or whether they should not. And Israel declared a revolt against Assyria. They were part of the revolutionaries. But Judah hasn't done that, and they don't want to do that. And Isaiah's advice to King Ahab in Judah has been to stay the course. Don't join the revolution or the rebellion, because Assyria would wipe you off the map, which is in fact what happens to the northern kingdom just a few years after Isaiah says this. But Isaiah is speaking in the south. And the other difference is Amos was speaking in about 760 BCE during peace and prosperity for Israel and Judah, when God says, I hate your feasts of worship if you don't practice justice first, care for the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the foreigner living in your land. And that famous line, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-rolling stream. And in just 15 years, a lot has changed since Amos. Now when Isaiah is speaking, he's not speaking in a time of peace and prosperity. He's speaking in a time of fierce civil war between Judah and Israel. And both sides fear Assyria that's threatening to invade them. And Isaiah has said to Ahab, align with Assyria, don't resist them. So then we get to our passage for today. Isaiah 9, 2 through 7. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in a pitch-dark land, light has dawned. Have you ever been to church on Christmas Eve? If you've been to church on Christmas Eve, you've probably heard this passage. I've read it every Christmas Eve for 40 years, only here once or twice, but 40 years of my ministry. And obviously, this is Isaiah speaking in poetic metaphor, but try to think about the metaphor of literally for a minute. What does it feel like for people walking in darkness to see a great light? You know, it's hard for us to experience darkness in our world. There is electric lights everywhere. The closest I've come to darkness in the ancient world was taking our youth backpacking with Nancy for a week in the wilderness in Colorado, miles from a dirt road. And there was no electricity and no lights, just lights by a fire. Darkness is a time of uncertainty. It's a time in which you cannot see what is out there. It's a time that might be dangerous, and you can't see where your enemies might be lurking. This morning, we didn't drive up here in darkness, but boy, we drove up here in fog. And down in Moberly to just south of here, it was really a thick fog. We could hardly see anything. We didn't know what was out there. We didn't know what was coming. And believe me, we thought about deer a lot with that, but we also even thought about what if a car's right in front of us going slow. So darkness ruins, even fog can make it scary for you. But when light is coming, it's a relief. You can begin to see what's out there. And even in the fog began to lift as we got here. And if there's danger, you can identify it, and you're able to know what's going on around you. And you can begin to make sense of the world around you. A great light coming in the middle of darkness is also disorienting, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Sometimes something new or hopeful, when it suddenly appears, it can throw us off our game. It can blind you for a minute. Sometimes when God acts in our lives, it can be a blinding light that disorients us and sends us out into a whole new future. And sometimes that light we see after darkness can be like the feeling you get when you know it's sunrise and it's been really dark. It's been the sort of wee hours of the morning, and then that yields to the slow, gentle dawning of light, awakening the world around you. And if you have spent any nights in some version of the dark night of the soul, whether that has been sickness or worry, or being by the bedside of a loved one, or in the middle of the night that seems so dark, so uncertain, so unscary, or grieving the loss of a loved one, in the light that begins to dawn, there's hope, and there's trust, and there's faith in God. And Isaiah is talking about the past tense here. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Those living in the parched dark, on them light has dawned. It's past tense. It's like these things have already happened. And yet they're in the middle of their disorienting darkness. They're in the middle of this civil war. And if I understand the text, Isaiah is saying, in the midst of this confusion, in the midst of this darkness and violence, in the midst of this uncertainty, a new day has dawned, a new light has come. And scholars call this the prophetic past, which means that we're talking about something in the future, but it's so certain we can talk about it in the past. And so we can say light has dawned even in darkness because it's gonna happen and it's sure to happen. So in the midst of this turmoil, Isaiah knows that the light is dawning, that the day is breaking, that even though you can't feel it and even though you can't sense it, you can experience it because you can know it will happen and like it's already. Isaiah goes on. Before that, we sang that song, "There'll be sunshine in the morning one of these days." We sang that a few weeks ago. And that's a song you sing when there is sunshine. But you say there's got to be sunshine one of these days. Isaiah goes on. "You have made the nation great. You have increased its joy." So this isn't just a prophetic oracle for the people about what God is going to do. It's an address to God here. It's like a praise psalm to God. Praise and thanks to you, O God, for in the midst of our uncertain dark times, you have made our nation great. You have increased its joy. They rejoiced before you as with joy at the harvest, as those who divide plunder rejoice. Joy at the harvest. Now remember, those people can't order their food from Amazon, and they can't go to the grocery to get their food. Their food came in the harvest. You had what you grew. And so the joy of the harvest is not simply, yay, we're finished with our work for the year. It means that what we have is enough to get us through even the winter, even through the dark times. That what God has given us is enough to get us through what we face in life. And that is joy. That is relief. Their struggle is finished. And dividing the plunder is a wartime image. The plunder is what you take from your foes. But what if that image isn't about being the invading army, but being the one who is invaded? Then you rejoice because you've defeated someone else's attempt to conquer you. And you've actually taken some of what your enemies wanted to take. And the conflict is over, and we've survived, and now we have something to show for it. The reason I say it seems to be plunder from defending yourself, not attacking your enemy, is this next verse. As on the day of Midian, you've shattered the yoke that burdened them. Midian. With Midian, Isaiah is recalling Gideon in the book of Judges. Gideon is supposed to raise troops for Israel to go and fight the Midianites who have oppressed them for 40 years. So Gideon raises an army, and it's something like 20,000 men. And God says, oh no, that's too many in the army. You don't need that many. And so Gideon asks how many are afraid to fight, and he gets rid of them, and the army's now down to 10,000 men. And then God tells him to tell all the army to lap water out of the river. And those that use their hands to drink the water are no longer part of the army. But those who lap the water like dogs out of the river, those are part of the army. So now the army's gone from 20,000 men to a few hundred men. And with trickery, the army of Midian, the people of Israel, get the army of Midian all worked up about themselves and all afraid of the noise that's going on out. And they come out and they start killing each other because of their fear in the darkness. So God miraculously defeats the Midianites without the Israelites having to do much of anything. And so Isaiah here says, as in the days of Midian, you've shattered the yoke that burdened them, and the staff on their shoulders, and the rod of their oppressor you've broken. So the people have been like oxen, working like under the yoke of Midian. And now they're free. God has shattered the staff and the rod of their oppressors. Because every boot of the thundering warriors and every garment rolled in blood will be burned, fuel for the fire. This is the image of an invading army that has been defeated. And so their war boots that trample over you are gone, and the garments that are in blood from your blood are now burned as fuel for the fire. They are no more. They are completely erased, as though they had never been. This is an image of an army that has invaded, been defeated, and now has no sign of it left. This is relief to the people that Isaiah is speaking to, a people undergoing civil war, a people subjected to violence by their neighboring countries. The invaders will be defeated, and the symbols of war, thundering boots and bloody clothes, will be burned up and gone. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us, and authority will be on his shoulders. As I said, we as Christians read this passage as a reference to Jesus, a child born to us, a son given to us. We read it every Christmas Eve. And the New Testament looks back on this passage in Isaiah as referring to Jesus. And so, of course, we do that. And it's a wonderful, beautiful passage to read on Christmas Eve. But Advent, the 4 weeks of waiting for Christmas, begins next Sunday. And so today, I want us to look back to Isaiah and hear these words, yes, referring to Jesus, but I also want these words, what did they mean for Isaiah in his time, when Isaiah spoke them? Not as an either or, one's right and one's wrong, as a both and. They had meaning for Isaiah's time, and they have meaning for us who follow Jesus. So before we get to the coming of Jesus, which we'll begin to celebrate next Sunday, what could Isaiah have meant in his time? When he said, a child is born to us, a son is given to us, and authority will be on his shoulders. Many scholars think this child is Ahaz's son, Hezekiah. And Hezekiah will lead a significant religious reform in Judah shortly after Isaiah's spoke this when he grows up a little. And most notably, he destroys the pagan idols and high places of worship. And he will successfully defend Judah against the Assyrian army, which will conquer Israel to the north. So Isaiah is saying this young child is going to be the one who brings about the peace, the one who brings light to Israel's darkness. And it's just interesting to me that Hezekiah, the son of the current king Ahaz, is a child when Isaiah is speaking this. Recently, we've read a number of Bible texts about older generations handing hope to younger generations. We read about the story of Samuel, where Eli is the old priest in the temple, and he hands the tradition on to Samuel to do a new thing as God's prophet. And a story that was in our lectionary, but we didn't read when I was on vacation, is a story of King Saul handing over the kingdom to young David. A new day is dawning, and authority from the older generation is handed to the new generation. And maybe that's a word we need to hear today. A child is born to us, a son is given to us, and authority will be on his shoulders. Now here we have the authority on his shoulders. And remember earlier, it was the yoke of the oppressors that are on our shoulders, the people's shoulders. Now this child, soon to be king, is bearing the burden of that authority. So the people no longer have to bear that burden of oppression. One way to read the Hebrew is, its authority will be on his shoulders. Like you have been carrying a yoke on your shoulders of oppression, and you have felt the weight of the world on your shoulders, and now that weight is on his shoulders. I don't have to carry that weight alone. Of course, when I say that, I hear in my memory too, Jesus carrying the weight of our sin on his shoulders when he carries the cross. That is also a beautiful image that we take from this prophet. But this prophet at the time is speaking about Hezekiah taking their wisdom. And he will be named. The name of the child is given this way: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Now, many Jewish translations read this not as names or descriptors of the child, but as descriptions of God. The he is a word that refers to God in many Jewish translations. And so one can read it that way. God is our wonderful counselor. God is our mighty God. God is our eternal Father. God is our Prince of Peace. So what do those say about God? But some people read these as descriptions of Hezekiah. So his name is Hezekiah, but the way he will be known as a king when he grows up is he'll be a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an eternal Father, a Prince of Peace. And here saying mighty God's a little problematic when you're talking about a king, so they translate as God-like might, because they don't want to deify a king. And of course, in our Christian traditions, we read these words as descriptions of Jesus. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. And you have the choice and you have the ability to read them as all three. And I invite you to listen to these words as things that we aspire to, as things that we appreciate about God and Jesus, as things that we wish our leaders would aspire to being counselors and God-like might and eternal Father and Prince of Peace. And to thank God for being that way, and thank God for revealing Jesus that way, who reveals God to us. There will be vast authority and endless peace for David's throne and for his kingdom. Remember, Isaiah speaking to his time at a time of great turmoil, real uncertainty, with the threat of Assyria all around him, with the very survival of Judah called King David's kingdom at stake. And in the midst of this fear of being conquered, Isaiah is saying there will be vast authority and endless peace for the throne of King David and of his kingdom. It will go on. The authority of the king is going to continue, and it will be vast, and it will bring about endless peace. At the time that the people are in the middle of political upheaval, not only will the nation continue, but the world will continue in endless peace. God's vision of peace. God's working for peace in the midst of division and uncertainty and political upheaval. Establishing and sustaining it with justice and righteousness, now and forever. The key to endless peace is establish and sustaining the kingdom with justice and righteousness, now and forever. We saw them last, these same words in Amos. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And here we see them again. Justice and righteousness is what leads to endless peace. Justice is distribution for everyone and doing acts of righteousness that makes us right with our neighbors and keeps both going on and on forever, an ever-flowing stream. The zeal of the Lord of the heavenly forces will do this. We can't do this by ourselves. We need God, and we need God's zeal to do this. And fortunately, God not only has a vision for us, he has the zeal to work with us and to bring about this peace. The notion of people walking in darkness, and it seems like I don't know what's happening in the world, and it seems frightening, and I don't know what's lurking around the corner, but there is a great light. There is a dawn. And we got to keep trusting that it's true. And there's going to come a time when we'll be rejoicing. And when we can set aside all these instruments of plunder and all these dehumanizing garments that we wear and find peace for the planet. And as Christians, we both believe that the Messiah has come and shown us how to live a life like this and a reign of peace that will be eternal. And if Jesus did not establish the throne forever when he came, he showed us what kind of authority would look like. And it did not look like stomping on people with your boots. It looked like loving people, even though it cost you your life. And he will come again to establish it forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Amen.